we have made it over to Greece. This entire poker vlog is taking place of Athens. After quite a bit of lovely sightseeing, we see some of the beautiful places that Athens has to offer. But as you all know, you come to this channel to watch poker and not watch me enjoy vacation. Almost immediately we have run into a hiccup. I did all of this planning very last minute. I planned this trip like 40 hours ago, and yeah, here I am now trying to find a charger for my phone and everything, because we have none. So gonna work on that now and see if I can get one. So will today's session include a lot of pain and agony, or finally be able to break through and defeat the Euro? Today's episode, it is the Bankroll Challenge episode 2, but for what it's worth, you guys will be appreciating it as close to broke does Europe. In the very first hand of note, we have a fun one to get things going off immediately. Early position raises to 4 euros. We are playing 50, half of a euro pretty much, and 1 euro. That is the blind tier. It's the biggest game I could find in Athens, at least in somewhat of an easy way. There is only one game going, and I had to wait over 2 hours to sit down in this game. As you guys can see, I'm ready to get the action going. We play 10-handed here. This first hand note, as we mentioned, 4 euros is the open. There are like 3 callers for this. And then the action gets to me in the big blind. I like down at ace 9 of diamonds. We can obviously just complete here, but I've been waiting for 2.5 hours. I want to play some poker. I decide to isolate to 30. The goal here is to get hands that are slightly better than mine to fold, and obviously we're able to take it to the streets if need be. We get one caller, which is the first caller of the initial raiser, so he double creams here, and we're going off to a flop where we flop top pair, 2 pair to be exact, 9-3-3. The action starts off on me here, and I think I for sure suffer from an issue here. The trouble with this casino and many of the casinos here that I found in Athens, at least from my interpretation of it, is because of some kind of weird laws, they cannot put actually any monetary or any numeric values to any of these chips, which means they're just color-coded, and you have to remember what they're worth. Obviously, I've been here for less than 25 seconds. I don't know what's going on. I meant to bet $25, but I end up betting $10.50. Kind of a drastic difference here, going for the old 1/6 bet, I guess. But anyways, it ends up working because we get a call. The turn card comes out the 10 of clubs. It does bring a backdoor flush draw. At this point, I want to allow my opponent to bluff if he wants to, so I just check it over to him. But unfortunately, our opponent checks it back. We're going off to a river card that comes out the 3 of diamonds now. That is exactly a great card for us. If our opponent happens to have an inferior pair like 8s through 4s, he probably is more likely to call here. And beyond that, the only trouble now that I face is that all 9s now chop with me. All that to be said, I'm looking to get value from all the holdings I have mentioned beforehand, so I go ahead and bet a little bit on the larger side for $45, about half the size of the pot. After a bit of thinking, my opponent decides the better of it and makes the fold. Good fold, sir. First hand in Greece is going my way. And just like that, we are going off to hand number 2. Early position has 2 limpers. The button decides to isolate to 15 euro. I'm in the straddle, and I look down at pocket 7s. I think this is an easy spot to just cold call sometimes, but obviously from the blinds or from the straddle against a button raiser isolator, it's probably going to play best here to just put in the 3-bet here. Obviously, we're 3-bet folding if it comes down to it, but I'm going to let my opponents get the better of my passiveness by just calling here. Again, we can go either way, but I have 0 information on these players at this point, so I go ahead and make the call. We're going to heads up to a flop that comes out queen 4-3 with 2 hearts. I do in fact have the 7 of hearts, which is, somewhat useful. I check call an 11 euro c-bet, and we're going off to a turn card that comes out the 8 of hearts. It now does bring in that front door flush, and it does improve me to a flush draw. After a bit of thinking, I decide to check it over to my opponent. I don't see the value in bluffing here, as I just don't think I'm going to get my opponent to ever fold any better. Our opponent does in fact check it back, and the river card comes out the ace of spades. Once again, another card that's not great for me to bluff at here. All of my opponent's hands that are going to be c-betting this flop as a bluff end up getting on the river. Ace-king, ace-jack, ace-10, all those holdings make sense. Even a hand like ace-5 suited, ace-deuce suited makes sense as well. And I can only help but think that the Euros out here at least somewhat play like the Euros back home, or back in my home. So after a bit of thinking, I decide that it just doesn't make any sense, and I'm not really, what am I really representing here if I lead out here? Maybe sometimes I have a flush, but more than likely it just really doesn't make much sense. So I go ahead and check it, knowing that I'm probably going to get checked and get shown some showdown value. And in fact, that is the case when my opponent shows pocket jacks after checking it back. Definitely a spot for us to go for a steal there, but I just couldn't really muster up the courage to do so, as I don't think my line would have made much sense. If he folded, I guess that's up for debate. Things continue to move along here. I'm in the straddle once again, and I'm the only person straddling here, providing maximum excitement and maximum action. There's several limps to me, like 4 or 5 or 3. It's hard to really tell. There's so much passiveness going on in this game. The action's on me in the straddle, and we look down at an off-suited variety of the old king deuce. Not good enough to raise, but it's good enough to check my options, so I go ahead and do that. We're going off to a flop where we improve ourselves to top pair. There are flush draws and straight draws to be had. So when the action checks over to the limper, the first limper, he ends up throwing out a c-bet, or I guess it's not a c-bet, but he ends up throwing out a $5 or a €5 bet. Literally getting confused as I say this hand. The second limper decides to make the call, and with the action back over to me, there's so much draws to be out there, as well as the simple fact that I can just purely have the best hand here, so I go ahead and make the call. We're going off to a turn card here that comes out the 4 of spades. A little worrisome as it brings a backdoor flush draw, but more than that, it does bring in that 5-6 draw we were talking about on the flop. Outside of that, we can still be ahead, but no reason for us to do anything besides check here. The better from the flop decides to throw out a second barrel for €12. The second limper folds and the action's on me. We have an easy call. The river card is not my favorite as it comes out the ace of hearts. Not my favorite because a lot of random holdings there that just barrel off here, like the ace x of diamonds now improved to top pair. So when I check it over to my opponent, he throws out a bet for 15. This is a really good price that we're getting. There's a small chance that we can be good here, but more than likely our opponent is taking us to value town. The one thing I can say is that when he doesn't bet really large, he's no longer polarized. So there is 1% chance that my opponent can be value betting worse. Maybe he limped in with a hand like queens, jacks, or tens, which these people have been doing for sure. So the question is to be said, am I ever getting value owned, or someone ever value owning themselves? Or what's really going on? It's hard to tell. When I'm curious, I'm always going to flick in the call. So I go ahead and make the call here. And my opponent chose ace-7 of clubs or something like that. So the suited ace-7 definitely gets the best of me. That river is not great, but I mean, it's hard to get too upset there. We had the best hand nearly the whole way and just get rivered there on the river. I think in hindsight, we got to do better though. We got to find a way to get those folds in check. Trying to gather myself after that last hand. I feel like we should have folded, but here we are, trying to get things back together in the right direction after the early position player decides to limp. I look down at the old ace-jack offsuit from late position. I isolate to $8, or €8 I should say. Only that limper makes a call. We're going off to a flop here where we flop a gutter ball. Action's checked over to me, and I decided to throw out a c-bet of €10. Somewhere in the neighborhood of half pot here. I don't even think we need to go that big. It's going to be really hard to get all the money in the middle, to be quite fair, on a hand like this. My opponent's sitting with about 300 effective behind. So when the action goes with a bet call, and we're going off to a river card, by some miracle and grace of the Greek poker gods, we now improve to the absolute stone cold nuts. The queen of diamonds comes on the turn. There is a really massive chance here that my opponent either has the lower side of the straight, or even more likely, which is going to be something like 2 pair or better. So when the action checks over to me, I'm going to get out of this half bet pot sizing and just going to go for the full blown enchilada. I make it the €40 pound or euro bet now is what's going on here. Again, my goal is to try to put as much money in the middle as I can. If there's any chance that my opponent has something good enough to raise, he's going to have to raise quite a hefty amount, or even all of his stack. And again, by some miracle of the poker Greek gods, that is exactly what happens when my opponent just ships in €300. A huge overbet, and little does he know that I'm sitting here with the nuts. I'm not in the business of slow rolling, so I snap call and expose my hand immediately, and I even ask my opponent if he'd like to run it twice, as I assume he's drawing a nearly dead or really thin. My opponent mutters and mumbles under his mouth, or under his breath, fairly upset, before showing ace-jack himself. What the is going on here? I thought I finally had my opponent, and it seems like the Greek poker gods are looking over their own players. Really frustrating spot here, obviously, as this is going to end up a chop pot 1,000,000% of the time. So the river card is inconsequential here as it comes out the 9 of clubs. I'm a little frustrated as we've been really punting it off here. And we finally end up with a big hand and our opponent has the same big hand. When it gets over to late position, who decides to isolate to 12 euro, the big blind calls and I'm the straddle and I look down at the old jack 9 offsuit. Obviously this is a pretty bad hand, but once again, my time is actually of the essence as I am playing on quite the bit of the time restraint. I've got a vlog to make, I'm here to give some action, so I make the call here. We're going 3 ways or 4 ways off to a flop, I should say, that comes out giving me top pair. Definitely a good spot here, and when the action checks through, I am 99% positive that I have the best hand. But when the turn card comes out the king, oof, that changes things quite quickly. A little frustrating, but I think this is a good spot to throw out a small c-bet, or a small feeler bet, I should say. I'll get raised by all hands that are better than us, and I can get called by hands that are still drawing, as this does bring a backdoor flush draw. So after a bit of thinking, I decided to land on the bet of 7 euro. The limper folds, and then late position raises to 45 euro. Out of nowhere, the big blind tanks, and tanks it up quite a bit before deciding to cold call that 45. With the action back over to me, although I love gambling and I love getting in the mix, this is a spot where I threw out a feeler bet to see where I was at, and I clearly am behind. So, although it's going to kill me, I do decide to stick to the plan and throw in the fold. They're going off to a river card that would have improved me to top or to 2 pair as it comes out the jack of hearts. Definitely frustrating, but when they check through, they both show ace king here, so both playing fairly, decent there as they end up having a good hand and they see me betting for no reason and they get me to fold. Unfortunate there that we couldn't end up sticking through there, and unfortunate that the turn card could have came a king. But like I said, really happy that we did something and we stuck to the plan and didn't get crazy. Once again, we are in the thick of the mix. Under the gun limps, I'm next to act in the +1 spot, and I look down at an offsuit queen 10. I go ahead and isolate this limper to 7 euro. The action gets back over to him, and he decides to call. The flop comes out with jack jack 7 here, and then my opponent throws out the old donk lead for 8 euro. I don't love this. This is pretty annoying, but the one thing I can say is that we have a plethora of backdoor outs. Any 9, any 8, any 10, any queen, any king, any ace provide us some form of equity or range advantage. So when our opponent bets 8, it's almost going to be impossible for our opponent to continue with anything that he has outside of a jack if the turn card comes any high card. So I decide to float one off here, and then the turn card gives us the 10 of clubs. We now go from floating to what I feel like is most likely, or more likely than not, the best hand. I doubt my opponent's going to lead out the flop there with a hand like 8-9. Again, I don't know for certain here as I've never played with these type of opponents. They might be doing stuff like that, but more than likely we have the best hand, and it seems even more evident when our opponent decides to check it over to me. With the action now on me, I think we can easily start betting for value. There is some merit in checking this back and allowing my opponent to either catch up and improving to some kind of pair that is still worse than mine, or more than likely, as we mentioned, just giving our opponent the ability to maybe call off on the river as I'm showing weakness by checking this turn. But in real time, I think it's going to be best to get some value from a hand like 8-7 that now improves to a straight draw as well to go along with their pair, their 2 pair I should say. So I bet 18 euro. Our opponent then goes into a very deep tank before starting to talk to me and trying to get a live read. Definitely not going to be in the business of giving my opponent anything that I can. I'm going to try to keep myself quiet, which I do a pretty decent job at. He eventually does make a very good laydown and shows a 7, so props to him. Good fold. Unlucky for us, we couldn't get any more value, but happy that we were going for what our opponent ended up having there. The same player from the last hand decides to limp once again, and once again I isolate with the old queen 9 offsuit. If the queen 10 worked, why the hell can't the queen 9 work? He decides to make the call, and we're going to heads up to a flop that comes out looking like it's pretty good for me, as it comes out ace king 7. We obviously don't make a pair here, but if ranges were a thing here, I'm probably going to be the one that has aces kings here. So I throw out a small c-bet of $10. Our opponent does end up making the call here, and we're going off to a turn card that comes the queen of spades. Now with the action on me, I decided to throw out a bigger c-bet for 25 euro. Our opponent thinks about it for a while and decides to make the call. The river card comes out the 4 of hearts. Doesn't change anything to the board texture here. Now my opponent checks over to me. I think we can pretty credibly leave him with a hand like middle pair or top pair weak kicker, and I'm only going to be able to get those hands to fold if I decide to bet on the big size. After a bit of thinking and battling with my mind, I decide that I'm going to go for it. I didn't go halfway around the world to start being a little baby about things, so I'm going to go for gusto. I decided to throw out a massive bet, a big over bet for 75 euro. Once again, the goal here is to get a hand like king 10 or king jack to fold, or even sometimes a weak ace. My opponent thinks about it for a second before asking me why I bet so big, and I bet so big because I don't have a good hand and I think I can get him to fold. Our opponent thinks about it for a bit before eventually deciding to land on the call. Seems like he's going to know what to do against me every single time of the day. Good hand to you, sir. He shows down ace jack offsuit, and that is going to be good enough to take it down. And our session is going to come to a wrap here with a really fun hand to end things off. I'm in middle position, and the bell is tolling as I now have to get out to dinner to join Stephanie for what will be a wonderful night here in Athens. But until then, we've got some poker to play. I look down at jack 6 of diamonds, good enough for me to raise. I make it 5 euro. I get 3 callers and the flop comes out, giving us a pretty decent one as it comes out jack 4-3 with 2 clubs and a spade. Flop and top pair here, I see no reason to not throw out a bet, so I make it 10 euro to go, and we get 2 callers from the button and the small blind. The turn card gives us some more equity if we needed it, I suppose, as it improves us to an open-ended straight draw to go along with our top pair. I decided to throw out a pretty nice bet here for 30 euro. We can still get called by a bunch of worse hands, and there's an off chance that my opponent can maybe be peeling off with a hand like 5-6 and now improves to a pair to go along with a straight, and a better chance that we can still get called by those hands like 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s. The button calls, the small blind folds, and the river card comes out the 10 of hearts. This is a little bit of a precarious card here now, as there's a less chance that I can get called by a hand like 8s or 9s here, but there's still a small chance that my opponent can maybe get sticky with those hands, and moreover, there's a small chance that my opponent does in fact have better and had better the entire way, and I don't want to call a big bet here, so I decided to what I think is the best option here, and I throw out a beautiful little blocker bet to hopefully get my opponent to call with worse as well as just call when he has better, so I don't have to face a larger bet. I make it 10 euro. My opponent pretty quickly throws in the call after a little bit of a chuckle, and I show him my hand, and it is in fact good here, and he chuckles and shows us the 6 of hearts. Really interesting card. I don't know what he had. I guess 5-6 makes sense, or maybe, I don't know. That's kind of the only thing I can think of, but either way, definitely happy to take that pot down. And that is going to bring us to the end of today's session. Let's talk more as we head over to dinner.
Do this with my eyes closed. It's too easy. It's too easy. I can do this with my eyes closed. It's too easy.
Sorry if I look a little bit ghosty, but that is, I forgot what it's like, Agalapithus? Anyways, as you guys know, this is not National Geographic. Stephanie's here, enjoying dinner. I'm falling asleep. It is incredible. I am running on fumes right now, but we were into the session for 600 euro and out for 450 euro exactly. Did not go my way towards the end, and to be quite frank, it's going to be hard to be making money out here. Unless I nut versus second nut somebody, it's going to be nearly impossible to get any money. But my high aggressive play is hopefully going to pay off, and people will see that I'm aggressive, and hopefully that'll, pay dividends later on when I do have it. But until then, I've got dessert to finish up, and we'll see you guys soon. Make sure to comment, subscribe, like, do all the good stuff.
Too easy. I can do this with my eyes